Hello, we are live. Hashtag I dare with her. You dare with her? My guests today are right here live with me in the studio and the day with her. But if you remember, for the past, this is our fourth edition in the hashtag I dare with her series, an initiative of the EU and the United Nations under the Spotlight Initiative in Nigeria. It is a pleasure to welcome you. My name is Adesuwa Onyenokwe. Everything that's got to do with today's woman, you'll find me there. We are about saving and making today's woman be the best that they can be. Like my guests, I could call their names. Some people may recognize them. Dolapo Olaniyan and Praise Fowowe. The good thing about technology is that you can Google anybody and find out things about them. So I don't have to read tons and tons of bios about them. But what Google won't tell you is the fact that these two people, they would give an arm and a leg to ensure that every girl in Nigeria and even in the world is saved from gender-based violence. And you see the statistics we quoted earlier, about people know at least three people who have suffered some level of sexual violence. And my two guests have to, at some point in their life, and they've shared this publicly at different times. So I'll start off by introducing Mr. Praise Fowowe. That your name is amazing. Praise Fowowe in Yoruba. Fowowe means take money bath. To have a bath with money. Or am I assuming that's what it means? Hi, Praise. I'm going to ask that they unmute Praise so that's right.
You're very correct. That's what I mean.
Fowowe, and that is your name. You didn't like just say I'm going to change my name to Fowowe.
No, I met my father answering the name, so that was the surname I was given.
That's the surname you were given. So when I described you as someone who would give an arm and a leg to save girls, was I correct?
Absolutely. I mean that's what my work has been all about.
You started out, from time, right? I've known you from, when you were much younger, more than 20 years ago. And it started with watching you inspire youngsters in the part of Nigeria that a lot of people won't go in Lagos at that time. It's Ajegule, high density, most people think are gone. And you started by working with commercial sex workers. Today, you are doing family engineering. Tell me about the journey from those sex workers to family re-engineering.
Thank you very much, Auntie Adeswa. Way back, I just saw the problem. I was taking a walk and I saw 13, 14, 15-year-old girls prostituting, and all I did was complain. Why can't government do something? Then it dawned on me that I could do something. So the following night, I went in there as a customer, disguised as a customer, and started talking them out of prostitution. I didn't have money. Surprisingly, they were leaving, so I emptied a particular brothel, reconciled, took those girls back to their parents and all, and, moved from one brothel to the other until the owners of brothel association came together and they said, nobody must get me into nobody must allow me into any brothel again. So then I saw the capital of prostitution in Nigeria called Good Evening Street, where all kinds of girls were prostituting. So I disguised as a pastor and I started holding fellowships inside the brothel just to get the girls out. But I noticed that I worked with over 300 commercial sex workers way back, and there was not a single one who was not a victim of child sexual abuse. Because initially I thought that the reason why people prostitute was poverty, until I began to question the fact that the girls had to sleep with 11 men every day to break even. So I knew that was more than poverty. I mean, for you to spread your life for 11 men meant that something must have happened to your identity and your humanity. So I realized that there was not a single one who was not sexually abused. So I began to look for materials on sexual abuse. There was none in Nigeria. So I decided to create. So I started creating content. But the more I was solving sexual abuse problem, I began to notice that parenting was a major issue. Because for those girls who had been sexually abused, then parenting must have been a problem. So I sought to solve parenting problem. Then I began to see marital problem. So every time I saw a problem, I would research to solve it. So I had created content along the line until the work became overwhelming, and I realized that it dawned on me that there was no single university in Nigeria that offered any course on family science, not a single university. So, and I have taken a few courses abroad, and they were very foreign. They weren't something you can apply. So I began to research. I looked for 40 couples who had crossed 40 year in their marriages, and about 40 whose marriages broke down, to find out how did you succeed, what did you do right, and they didn't know. All of them were saying, "Oh, it was prayer," and I knew it was more than prayer. So I asked them if I could observe them, study them, ask a couple of questions. So I observed, studied them, then I built a model, built a certification course around it. Then I began to check all the couples, and I realized that what I built worked. And that was how we started Family System Engineering Certification Program, which is basically the only certification program that exists right now. Good thing is we created a psychometry that has gone
Yes.
global right now, wherein as practitioners, you don't even need to listen to couples anymore. Once you run administer the questionnaire, in 15 minutes, you could actually describe 94% of what they were going through in their marriages and create intervention, to resolve it. So that was my movement from child sexual abuse prevention to, because we say that the most important nation on earth is the family. So
Is
we
a
believe that if
family.
you get the
Absolutely.
family right, if couples knew how to build a family system that works, then every child will be saved. So that's how we got into.
I love that. I love the fact that you traced it back to family. When you saw a problem, you solved it. But it started with wanting to help commercial sex workers and realizing that at the bottom of even that is sexual abuse. And I
Yeah.
find that interesting for someone like Dolapo. Dolapo, I'd like to bring you in here and a quick introduction to Dolapo. Dolapo was, I mean, the last time we saw, we're shooting a behind the scenes shoot for a cover shoot for Today's Woman magazine,
Yeah.
under the ages of the Dr. Kemi Ibru's Worry Foundation.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what I found interesting about your story, because it's going again to the point that Praise has just mentioned, that most of these
Exactly.
problems are within the family. You were a young girl when you suffered abuse from the hands of somebody who was supposed to be caring for you. True?
Yeah,
So, but
true. So, when Uncle Praise was, giving the story about how most people who turn to sex for pleasure, have a history of abuse. It then, brought me back to basically my own story and my upbringing. For me, it started when I was 6, and that was a tenant, one of my grandmother's tenants, who was supposed to be looking after my sister and I when my grandmother was busy with, day-to-day activities. And it felt like somebody I could call uncle. And so that was just like a basic turning point for me. And coupled with the fact that my grandmother, who knew about it, felt this is something that could cause a permanent smear on the family. And she said, nobody must know about this. And she decided to punish him, her own way. And it felt very strange to me, but then nobody cared to, you know, even listen or even try to understand what had been done, because basically people who are victims or survivors of violence are basically conditioned to just move past it like nothing ever happened. And then so when it happened again when I was 13, and it became a continuous, molestation, my body was already getting so attuned to sexual intercourse that it was something that I would thrive on. And it was like if my body didn't have it a day, then I would die. So when he was talking about the whole uh the high affinity for sexual intercourse stemming from sexual violence, I totally got the picture, because you remember then when we were talking, Auntie Diswa, when I said most survivors of sexual violence cannot talk about this in public because it feels like they're dirty. It feels like they're prostitutes. It feels like, they have a very low moral standard when they come out to say, oh, I'm a survivor of multiple sexual violence and I actually love sex at a point in my life that I couldn't go a day without having it. So it felt like, well, maybe you just didn't learn your lesson, or maybe, it feels like you're weird. And then I remember the first time I spoke to a therapist concerning it, and I'm like, what if I say that, I then begun to love sex so much that it was like food for me. And then the therapist looked at me and said, you're perfectly fine. Like it's something, it's two things. It's either some ladies or some girls who have been molested before, or have been raped. uh they either hate men, or sex is like a rebound for them. So I fell into the category of sex being the rebound, being like, and then you begin to create alter egos, because I did that too. And it wasn't
What does that
consciously.
mean?
Okay, so you begin to create identities for yourself to make yourself dead to the pain that you're feeling, to the trauma, to whatever emotion you're feeling. So basically, it's like having sex with different people and not getting emotionally attached to them, because it's
So
like
it's
another
just
version of you doing
it's
it. Yeah.
that's probably what the commercial sex workers had to do, right?
Exactly, so most of
Just
them just make themselves
pull
dead
the
to
change them
that, and
in.
it's like a different person doing all of that. Yeah. So I totally perfectly understand what Uncle P was talking about. And it's just very sad that the family that is supposed to be um like the giants covering for children, not just covering to cover up the bad side, but also to like avenge on behalf of the children, is the same unit that would say, let's keep it quiet. And that was something that I feel like I never forgave my family for, because I felt like if my grandmother had told my mom, maybe something would have been done and I would have felt better. But my grandmother went to the grave with all that information, and it wasn't until my mother and I had this spat when I was 16, and then everything just came out, and it was like I was running on this high adrenaline, and I just wanted people to get hurt. And I told her, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. Did you know this happened? Did you know that happened? I mean, it was terrible. And I had bottled up so much for years. And even despite the fact that I had attempted suicide when I was 13, nobody was listening to me, because my mom just rushed me to the health center not so far from the house. And I remember the nurses telling me, oh, what an ingrate, I think she's possessed. I mean, why would she want to commit suicide? Nobody was asking me, what is happening to you? Hey, you, this girl,
What
come, let's
what did
talk.
you try? What did you try to do when you say you
Oh,
attempted suicide? Did you take
so
pill?
I mixed toilet wash with methylated spirits with I don't know. I just mixed a whole lot of things, but I remember the
Wow.
toilet wash because it was jig, and I mixed methylated spirit.
So the
And
idea
then
was what was pushing it? Was it something to do with an abuse at that time or what?
yeah, because when I was 13 was when somebody who supposedly wanted to marry my mom was constantly sleeping with me. And I mean, I was just 13. I was in JSS3. I was this golden girl, academically. And it started affecting me. I didn't know how to voice out. And then I told somebody I was quite close to, who I thought was my best friend. But she couldn't process it. And because she couldn't process it, it made me recoil into my shell. And then my grandmother's words started, ringing in my ears, like, you're not supposed to tell anybody. When you tell people, this is how they'll perceive you. So I felt bad that, oh my God, this is something she warned me against, the first time. And I wish I had not done this. So I felt like it was just the whole world against me, and nobody wanted to like help me. And that was when I just said, okay, fine, let me just, kill myself. Because if I kill myself, this person doesn't touch me again. This person doesn't sleep with me again. If I kill myself, then, it just ends. But I was just, of course,
Anyway, but you're
yeah,
alive today, and we
I'm
thank God
alive
for that. Because
today. Yeah, I'm
I
alive
would like to
today.
at this point go back to Praise because he wrote a book called Strictly for Girls. Apart from the other books he's written, Strictly for Girls. And I want to ask Praise. I'll take a short pause. Let's see that book before I come back and speak to you about why I'm showing that book today. Now it says premarital sex. In this premarital sex, he said this book is strictly for girls. Apparently, you think girls need to learn some basic knowledge about sex. Does this have
Yeah.
any way? I mean, I'm wondering if there's any relationship that this kind of information empowers them in some way that you think might protect them from abuse.
Yeah, I have done quite a number, I mean, a lot of work along this line. I wrote Strictly for Girls when I went to a particular secondary school, all girls school in Surulere, and the girls had a lot of questions to ask me, and many of those questions were at best sexual myths. That if you want to develop hips, you need to have sex. Girls, men don't want virgin because sex with a virgin is boring. Accumulation of sperm will cause backache. If a man doesn't, if a boy doesn't have sex with a girl, it's going to run mad. So as a girl, you have to, give yourself away and stuff like that. So I had
So
to.
that your boyfriend doesn't run mad.
Oh yeah. So I had to, create, a chronicle of questions and provided answer from a male's perspective to help the girls to understand that, hey, at the end of the day, you have to learn the capacity to, to say no. But there was something I've done prior to that, which is creating sexuality education that
That's right.
parents can teach children
To
from
teach
18
the
months.
children.
I had to write all kinds of songs, to drive it home because the strength of the predator is the ignorance of the child. I was sexually molested at the age of 4, and it was because my parents never taught me anything about sex. And the predator had a field day for 8 years of my life, till I was
Wow.
12.
Does the
So
predator live in your home?
oh yes, it was an auntie, it's and it was so I always say to people that if you empower a child, because you're not going to be around your child all the time, but you can empower the child against the predator. At least if your child knows. So for example, the old rule even says that a predator is someone who tries to touch your private part. The new rule of predator is a predator is anyone who tries to who gives you anything and tell you not to tell your parents, because predators will first teach you secrecy before they begin to make demands. So if you stop it at the level of I give you chocolate, don't tell your parents. If you can flag that person as a predator, you won't even get to the point where it begins to touch you.
I'm
So
going to get a little personal here, Praise.
yeah,
If you had the kind of information you put in that your book, I remember your book. There's a song that goes with it in my head. I'm not sure of the. Can
yeah.
you just repeat that song?
Okay, my body is my friend and is the house that I live. It has two different parts called private and public. I will do just everything to protect my body because I love my body and my body loves me.
So the
There are
parts
about
are
10,
there are
10
private
songs in
parts,
that album.
there are private parts, and there are public parts.
Yes,
Teach them from a particular age, from 18 months, you say.
yes,
So do
yes.
you think that information could have protected you from the
Absolutely.
auntie that was
Absolutely.
abusing you?
Absolutely. Because now I see a lot of parents share testimonies of how he protected their children, how predators came calling and their children were able to report. I see a whole, it breaks me down every time I see that. I put the model in a school in Otta 11 years ago. And they had to call me back to the school last week to say, oh, Praise, we now want it for the entire secondary school as well. So I just finished implementing a new curriculum called Ready for Life, the first of its kind in Nigeria. But the man said to me, he said, the songs you taught our children 11 years ago kept them sane. That for every time they went for holiday and the predator came calling, they could report in all. So if I had that information, there was no way, because when predator says that if you told someone your parents were going to die, I wanted to protect my parents, so it was okay
Wow.
for me to keep quiet. But if someone had told me that nobody was going to die, I would have reported. Yeah.
Because I think that was a situation with Dolapo too. They warned you that if you report, if you unmute yourself, Dolapo.
Yeah, exactly. So the one that happened, when I was 6, that was it. But I was still bold enough to show my grandmother because I was bleeding. But then when I was 13, he said the same thing. I remember Ben telling me, "Oh, if you tell your mom, this is what is going to happen,"
You call the
scaring
person's
me.
name.
Yeah, I called his name. Like, I'm bold enough to call their names now. These were names that I would hear people that bear the same name, and then I would shrink in fear, But after going through therapy for so many years, it's like facing your demons and then living a better life. Basically, like I can boldly say their names now. So I
No, but
remember him.
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I
I'm
remember
sorry.
him telling me then too, that oh, if I should tell my mom I was gonna die, it was even me saying I was going to die, and then something bad will happen to my mom too. And I was like, oh, I can't do this.
Where was
And
your
because,
father? Did you lose your father early or
oh
something?
yeah, so the thing is, my mom and my dad, they didn't even, stay together. It's always, been like that basically. So yeah, my mom and my dad, they don't live together. So
Okay. So I mean,
yeah.
I'm going to swing back to Praise because I picked on that because apparently an absentee father could have exposed her, even though we hear stories of fathers even abusing their children these days. I don't know. Praise, what do you think? Have I lost them?
I think he's
Fathers are
muted.
supposed to, a
Aha, go
father is
ahead.
supposed to give solidity, the foundation of the home. And when, I mean, we all want a father who is strong. Remember, as children, if someone threatened you outside, all you needed to say is that I will tell my daddy.
I'll tell my daddy for
As
you.
you go and run home and say, we believe that our father could beat anybody. Now when that figure is absent, it becomes a problem. And that's why I always tell single mothers to find a father figure for that child. It could be an uncle, but there has to be someone in there that the child can actually defer to. Where once a father is absent, a lot of things can go wrong. I mean, there are fathers who are living in the house, but they're also absent emotionally, and so once you have absentee fatherhood or absentee parenting, and never forget that one of the things that we never learn is how to parent, especially in this part of the world. I mean, it's one of the areas I've had to focus on running seminars consistently for people to understand that there is a way to parent because oftentimes um, many parents are the ones who mess up the esteem of their children and the bid to correct by their anger, by what they call discipline, which we now know as domestication. They are the ones who steal the esteem of a child because every misbehavior can be traced to two things: a non-discovery of self or a non-remembrance of self. If you don't know who you are likely going to mess up. If you forget who you are susceptible to all kinds of things. So parents are supposed to help their children master their identity. But when your anger becomes something that becomes toxic to your child's identity, you beat, you slap without communication, then you have a situation where your child begins to look for love anywhere. And predators are experts at dishing that type of love. They come very nice. They are there for you. They listen to you. They do everything your parents are not able to do. They are the nice people who can tell you you are good. You are going somewhere to happen. And before you know it, you feel
They're
obliged to do something bad.
susceptible. They're
And that's where
susceptible.
it starts.
I could see Dolapo just going. It's like you were ringing a bell in her ear.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay, yes.
as you're responding to me, I want you to take us to the point where even after Ben, other things happened. You ended up in a relationship. You were almost married. You had a child. Life went on, and you still didn't have that aha moment until much later in life.
Yeah. So I don't know.
The
Life
story
is
is too
just
long.
the story is plenty. Okay, so yes. So after the whole thing with from when I was 14 when it ended because Ben actually changed location and all that. Yeah, he was a worker in church. Let me add that actually. So he changed location and I fell in love, well, too early, basically. And then I got pregnant, and then my mother was like, "Ha, you have finished it. This is just the end." And then so year in year out, I fell out with the father of my child, and then years later, my baby daddy came back into the picture, and it was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, this and that," and so, but then people around me told me, "Oh, you just have to do this because of your child." And I think we ladies are so conditioned by the society to want to do things because of our children, even if it's not something we want. And so basically, that was how it was for me. And then, yeah, we were engaged all of a sudden, and then, boom. Uh, Now when you're in a relationship with someone you love, or let's say that you're engaged or you're married, there is something Africans do not generally believe, which is marital rape or relationship rape. They believe that if you're in a relationship with somebody, and then you say, "No, I'm not doing this," you're fronting. It's like, you're just beating about the bush. I mean, how can you say that somebody you're romantically involved with rapes you? How can
Did it
you say
happen to
that?
you?
Yeah, it happened to me. How can you say that somebody that you're married to rapes you? Because I was not even thinking about it as rape. I would just remember instances where it would say, "Oh, I want to have sex," and I'm like, "No, I don't want to have sex." And then the next thing I know, he does it. I'm like, "But I said no," as in I said no. Sometimes I would cry, and then later on, I'm like, "Okay, you know what? Whatever you want to do, just do it." I was already zoning out again, like creating that other ego to just deal with the mess. And it wasn't until I got into therapy, like deeply into therapy, that I discovered that, he was also doing the same thing, but then I was tuning it out from my memory. I was just blocking everything off because I just did not want to deal with it all over again. And going deep into it, when I, listen to the recordings, I'm like, oh my God, I just broke down. I'm like, I didn't know that I was shutting, those memories off. And so basically that was it. And then when I got to the point where I discovered that, he had a whole lot of baggage to, the lies, I just couldn't keep up with it. And then the whole emotional abuse, I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm just so done. And so that's just one thing about we ladies when we get into relationships, and then it's like a cycle is being repeated again. Sometimes it's very tough for us to voice out because we're like, who's going to believe us that this person I call a fiance, this person I call a husband is raping me? Who is going to believe it? So it's just so complicated, and more so when you're a single mom and you're trying to protect your child, you're trying to protect yourself because the society already makes you feel like you're a quarter person, not even half, you're a quarter person, because being a lady is like you're a second class citizen. Then you being a single mother is like a quarter person, you're not even near half. So that stigma alone was something I could say maybe that was why I said yes to him, to the point that I wanted to marry him. But then when all the knots in my head were rearranged, I was like, yeah, I've had enough. I've had enough because 2018, um, I will never forget, December 2018 was the other suicide attempt that I had. And it was at that point, I was basically looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, girl, what are you doing to yourself? Like, you're the same person who is working with other girls out there trying to make their lives better, and yet
Because you had
you're a
started your
complete mess.
NGO, you had started your NGO by that time,
Yeah,
and
I
yet you
had.
were not sorted out really.
Exactly. So, and this is something I tell people, about parenting, that because I was likening my NGO to, like, being a parent, and then my NGO was my child. I said, if you do not heal from your childhood trauma, you can't be a better parent. It just doesn't work. There's no fiction about it. There's no, let me say, film trick about it. If you do not heal from your childhood trauma, you can never be a better parent. And so that was when I took this conscious effort, to go back into therapy. And I'm like,
So
okay, you
you
know what?
sought help.
Yeah, I sought help. I
Okay.
sought help.
I want to take a break so I can play. There's a play that's been developed for parents. We've been talking about parents doing this, parents doing that, doing the right thing. And I would like to take a pledge that I'm hoping parents will adopt very quickly. Can I play that pledge before I come back to my conversations with Dolapo and Praise?
I pledge to learn about types, signs, and prevention of violence against children. I pledge to speak out and report all cases of violence against children to the appropriate authorities. I pledge to step in and help any child experiencing violence. I pledge to consciously create an environment free from violence for my child. I pledge to communicate effectively and spend quality time with my children and build a trustworthy relationship with them. So, help me God.
When I see that, does it seem like a highfalutin thought? The whole idea is to get parents to realize they do have a responsibility. Apart from creating the right environment, they need to educate themselves about how they can protect their kids. But then, Praise, I want you to respond to this. We hear of cases of parents themselves abusing their children or abuse within the family. How do you think we can get people to support an end to that?
Um, well, never forget that abuse is a cycle in itself. It's a
Mm,
cycle that if care is not taken, if it's passed to you, you will pass it on. Right. So yeah, it's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. So someone has got to drop the baton and say, "Hey, I'm not going to pass this on." All right. Because we say acting people hurt others. Now, when you have a situation where is the father is molesting or his mother is molesting, the question we should ask is, I mean, how come one person is keeping quiet about it? Now, before now, because a lot of women are not financially empowered, so they stomach a whole lot of things. But I think with the new era of women empowerment going on, I'm not sure a lot of women are now going to take this, except it's in the rural area, and that's why the school has a role to play. I mean, when we're implementing what we just implemented for a school over the last 1 week, one of the
mhm,
things they said they should watch out for is that there are a lot of girls who come to school, right? And when it's time for holiday, they don't want to go home because the father or there's an uncle somewhere who is molesting them, and we taught them what they need to do. We need to come to terms with the fact that no child is safe until every child becomes safe, and we need to go back to community parenting. We say in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child, but we are always thinking about our village where we hail from. No, the village is the community. We all need to now take responsibility because what has happened over time is this concept of I don't want people to hold me. It's not my child. I don't want to
mm,
get in trouble, and because I don't also blame people. We are in a country where people are above the law, right? And so when you have men who are above the law, men who are powerful, who are above the law, who are perpetrators of things like this, who is going to report? Who is going to bail the car? People are afraid for their lives, so people
mm,
rather keep quiet
mhm,
and
mhm,
stomach it down until we get to that point where in our country nobody is above the law. Probably in
mhm,
America, for example,
mhm,
or developed countries,
mhm,
no one is above the law. If people will even resign almost immediately once the case hits the press. But wherein you have people above the law in Nigeria, it becomes very, very
mhm,
difficult. But when we begin to empower the children, maybe from school, if school takes responsibility for this, at least a child is able to report. And once the child
mhm,
is able to report, at least I know of Lagos State. I know that Lagos State government has withdrawn some children from their parents on cases like this, and the children were taken care of by the state. So when
mm,
we have, unfortunately, we don't have that replicated in other states of the federation. As we stand today, there are several states in Nigeria that are even yet to pass the Child Rights Act into law.
mhm, mhm,
Many states
mhm.
in Nigeria. So
Yeah.
when you have such states, where do we go? When you have fathers who rape children in those kind of states, where do you go? What do you say? It means the child in those kind of states are not safe, and that's where we now need to begin to question: Are we in a country,
Uh-huh.
or we're just in a geographical location of different tribal groups, everyone doing whatever they want to do?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, I find that interesting. There's a quote that I wanted to read that I have. I think I had it typed out somewhere that says that the devastating effects of sexual violence on victims can be mitigated not only by effective professional responses, but also by contributions of paraprofessionals and community-based organizations. I'll scroll that, yes, that it's only when I'm coming to Dolapo now because paraprofessionals and community-based organizations. So you went ahead to set up an NGO. What's the slant of your NGO today? You remember, Praise just said something now. No child is safe till every child is safe. Some parts of the country have adopted the law that should protect kids, but other parts haven't adopted it. So, what strategy should we be using to ensure that this message of supporting, especially the girl child? I'm particular about the girl child. They raise the nation. Sorry, you praise.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's just I share the same frustration. Uncle Praise, is also sharing. It's just quite unfortunate that
Sorry, I must stop
when
you there, Dolapo. Dolapo, just a minute before you continue. Uncle Praise. It is like you know, I've been saying this Uncle Praise has.
okay, Mr. Praise.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It just means that there's some relationship that you
No,
admire his work.
No, no, not at all. No, no, no. Okay. So basically, for me, starting the NGO came from a point of working with different NGOs and understanding that there was just this gap. And most of the people that I interacted with on social media had this toxic way to, approaching gender-based violence, especially sexual violence.
What's that toxic way?
So there's something we call toxic masculinity, which is, boys being trained from a very young age to have this sense of entitlement that women are objects that can be possessed by men, and having this notion that as a boy you do what you want to do and get away with it. As a boy you can, strike any girl that talks to you in a way that you're not comfortable with. That as a boy, you can have sex with a girl and get away with it. They call it having sex with a girl. They don't even term it rape anyway. Because why? Girls are like, readily available commodities that can be taken hold of. So, and then I thought to myself, I said, okay, fine. There is a gap of sensitization. People are not properly oriented to understand that toxic masculinity doesn't even help us in any way. Nigeria is already a patriarchal society uh, that actually supports men, even more than women. But that's not the bone of contention. The bone of contention is that some people do not understand what sexual violence is, and some people do not understand what consent is. So the Gender Equality and Empowerment Network, started to create a safe space where girls and women can, fully exercise their rights without fear or limits, but while focusing on men as the main agents of change. And so we started this, Twitter chat, called Frisky Friday, where we would talk about things related to sex, related to consent, related to, to gender-based violence. And you would be surprised at so many, misconceptions that people have carrying all around, walking all around.
Like,
Initially, like somebody telling you, a man telling you, it is, I can always force myself into my wife. I mean, she's my wife. He doesn't think it is marital rape because he had already paid the bride price, so she's my possession. And then you have boyfriends, this is like life stories, and you'd have boyfriends, coming to say that, why would my girlfriend deny me sex? I mean, she's my girlfriend, so I can do this. And then you would have, boys, or rather guys who would come online to say, the reason why they feel like, they can have any girl they want, they can also rape girls, is because somebody older than them who was a lady, started raping them too when they were young, and they're paying back the favor because they feel like it is the norm. So there were just so many, misconceptions, and it was very, very bad. I've
so
had
your
a couple.
NGO now, okay, your NGO now seeks to stop that. Is it working?
Well, from the feedbacks we got, via Twitter, so many people, confided in us that, they needed help. There's this case of a guy who confided in us saying that he had been raping his sister for a couple of years. And why is he raping his sister? Because the father does the same thing to the mother. And there were times that, they would hear the mother cry every night, shout every night at the father, that, you are raping me. I don't like this. I don't want it. I'm saying no. And then the boy hears all these things. But the cycle of violence is just so tricky that if there is no proper intervention, it becomes this, the conception then becomes like a way of life, to the people that have, experienced it. And that is why you see some, guys that have gone through sexual violence, they pay it's like they're paying it forward. It's like a favor that they're paying forward. And so when there is no, proper intervention, like psychotherapy, when there is no rehabilitation whatsoever, these people turn out to become monsters. And then I had to link them up because we don't provide services, where we provide psychotherapy or we do social support. So basically, we connect them to DSVRT, or we connect them to Mirabel Center or Warif. So that's
So the
basically what we do.
the idea is to raise the awareness, start the
Yeah,
conversations, and give them support. There's a point that you
exactly.
raised, which I would like Praise to respond to. The boy abusing his sister because he heard his father abusing his mother. Would that be just an excuse, or can you identify with that kind of thought, Praise? Being a man, because oftentimes all that Dolapo has said, for example, she talks about how boys have this entitlement figure, and that's where the problem is. Is this dangerous for the young girls in our society today, and how can we solve that problem? Praise, please unmute your mic. Or maybe Praise is, have we lost Praise? Okay, I think we've lost Praise. But while we've lost Praise, I wanted us to play that short video, the one about the pledge by the children, which is very key before we continue with the conversations. Can we take that very quickly?
I pledge to always talk to my parents and other trusted adults about anything that makes me feel sad, angry, afraid, or worried. I pledge to say no if someone asks to see or touch my private parts. I pledge to respect and care for other children as I like to be respected and cared for. I pledge to report, speak out, and get help from my parents or a trusted adult when anyone hurts me. So help me God.
Okay, Praise dropped off for a bit, maybe because I don't know what Dolapo's mic. If you unmute yourself, Dolapo,
Yeah.
that pledge, say, I pledge to tell my parents whatever happens. I pledge to know the body parts. I pledge not to. How do you think we can disseminate this information to the furthest and widest parts of our country?
Yeah. So
Somebody says, Dolapo, you're a
it's
strong woman doing God's work,
thank
honestly.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So I'd say we start with family, and the best places to start with family are the religious centers, the churches, and the mosques. So let
Why?
me tell you this. I'll tell you this because, okay, so there was this time, I'm not going to mention the name of the church, but I said one of my perpetrators, like the one that really, really dealt with me, was a worker in church, one of these big Pentecostal churches. I've spoken about it before, but I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to drag, some churches in the mud, but it is what it is. And then I wrote an email to the general overseer and I said, where do we go to where the church is where the perpetrators are? And you'll be amazed at the number of perpetrators we have in the mosques and in the churches. Those are like safe hiding places because everybody is sanctimonious, raising holy hands. And the best places you can easily reach out to parents, and then you debunk all this, cultural beliefs that they have, all this, normative constructs that are with them, is through religious centers, the worship centers. Imagine when a pastor or an imam comes to, talk about this, after the Juma service, or maybe the Sunday Asalat gathering that they do, or maybe in the church on Sundays, or maybe during the midweek services, and then the pastor is talking about sexual violence and the importance of parents, watching over their children, and children, responding to the parents. Imagine what that would do. And imagine when, your pastor says, it's not going to be overlooked. It's not going to be a thing of Jesus says we should forgive and forget. We are going to prosecute. We are going to make sure that we hand them over to the police. Imagine how many people will come out to say, Pastor, this person had done this to me. This person had done this to me. Or they say, oh, Imam, this person, in the mosque who is in charge of teenagers has been doing this and has been doing that, because the person who molested me when I was a teenager was also touching other girls, was also sleeping with them. So it's like a very good hiding place for them. Religious centers are like the perfect hiding place.
What did the church do?
Yeah. So the thing is, I didn't have the guts to talk about it for so many years. And eventually, when I wrote that letter and I was summoned by the national headquarters, I was then told that the perpetrator had changed to a different church entirely. Then it was then that I understood that it wasn't me, because other people had lodged complaints. So
Okay.
it was basically like, they were chasing after a shadow. So at that point, I'm like, oh, I wish I had spoken up earlier. But imagine if the church had felt so safe for me that the pastor was, making all this, societal ills, a normal conversation in church that would spike awareness and would spike like a safe space. And then people will feel like, oh, I feel comfortable, telling my pastor this. I feel comfortable telling this, maybe deacon or deaconess this, or this imam or this alpha this, because they will hand the person over to the police, not try to settle amicably and say, Jesus says, forgive and forget, or turn the other cheek.
I hear you. I hear you very clearly, Dolapo. I'm glad that Praise is back. And I want Praise to respond to the point I raised before. You were ready. You remember what I said? I wanted you to address the issue of boys being the abusers and how we can make that, how we can help. I said the young man who said because he heard his mother shouting that the dad was raping him, that's why he's raping his sister. And this whole idea of men not being able to hold themselves, that's why they rape others. So I wanted you to address that, please.
Okay. Statistically now more boys rape girls, and that's why when we talk about sexual abuse, now we say that it's a situation where the vulnerability of a minor is taken advantage of by a major or a fellow minor for sexual satisfaction. So you have a lot of fellow minor who now molest fellow minor. And
why?
Sorry?
Why is this happening? Is it pornography?
It's what it is, Antia. It's what it is. That's a culture. And let's not forget, and I always like to point us back to what our history says, that in our history, especially Southwestern part, we have a culture called, it's nothing hold anymore, but in our history, at least from what I have read and what I was told, we had a culture of Obagbesele. Obagbesele means that your king can look at your wife and says, I put my leg on this one, and against a wish, take your wife away from you. Right. That will pass for rape in our age and time. And let's not forget that when we were in school, secondary school, there is no single girl that I know that lost her virginity willingly gave it away. It was always with a boyfriend, and the first act was usually forced. After that first act, she may now continue to have sex with the guy, right? And many girls never saw it as any big deal, in fact, many of them just told themselves, the first guy to sleep with is the person I'm going to marry. And that's a culture, that was a culture in many secondary schools. It's still a culture till now, right? So you have those kind of situations. Then you have what is promoted in the media, what is promoted by music, our musician. Check the lyrical content. In fact, it has gotten so bad. An artist released a song that outrightly says, vagina is for penetration.
Is this in English or in Yoruba, or what language?
In Yoruba, and that song trended. Many corporate companies actually, listed that guy for their end of the year. Government even invited him to come and sing.
They don't understand the language, maybe.
They can't, so you can't say they don't understand the language. You can't say we don't understand the language, right? And in fact, after him, another A-rated, sang a song that says, go and have sex with her now, right? These are songs that young people listen to, that they play in their birthday and whatever. And let's not forget, the porn industry in Nigeria is about to overtake the American porn industry, right? In 1996, when I started researching porn in Nigeria, you will never find the face of a Nigerian on the internet who is having porn sex. Now, it's an entire industry, huge. And the largest consumers are ages 7 to 18. So
where do they consume it?
Sorry?
Where do they consume it?
Well, online. It's online. You only need to type it online.
So on their phones.
On their phones, yes. On their device. There was a girl that was brought to my office, age 8, who had seen 60 porn sites that morning. And I
On which
asked her, how
phone?
on their phone, on a device, on her iPad.
So an 8-year-old has a smartphone.
Oh yes, I mean parents are very careless with things like that. I asked the girl, how did you know about porn? She said school bus. She was in the school bus. A 7-year-old was bragging about how many porn sites she had seen. So she went online and went to Google what is porn, and she started consuming images. So it's a combination of so many things right now. And when you have those issues where boys are already hooked on porn, they're going to, of course, practice it on the girls. And you have cases where the girls are the ones luring the boys into it, and in some cases, parents who live in the same house, maybe one room, father and mother having sex, thinking their children are sleeping, children begin to have their own on the floor. In fact, these are cases that you don't want to, I mean, you are wondering what's going on. So we all need to come together and begin to say, are we going to pretend that rape is not our culture? Maybe it's our culture and we need to change the culture, because if it's not our culture, then we would have overcome this thing, right? So if we admit that maybe it's our culture, it's been our culture, and it was our culture because we didn't know better, and now begin to educate. And she mentioned it, where parents gather are in the churches, in the malls, in the schools. Can we go to those places and take the battles lines in there? Can we begin to teach people about proper parenting, the implication of sexual violence against people, right? That when someone is sexually violated, in fact, one of the things we say is that abuse cannot be cured. It only responds to healing. And that's why you can see someone who you think has overcome, slip back to depression, slip back, becomes suicidal, the next minute, because it's better not to actually be touched or be molested than to be molested and be trying to recover, right? So it's a whole lot of work that we need to do, because while we are saying adults should not rape younger people, more young people are touching themselves now in the boarding house, in our houses, across various places. It's almost like it's a new culture, it's a new norm, and you can literally trace it to pornography and many of the soft porn in our songs and many of the things that they watch. So these are the battle lines. So we need to begin to shoot sitcoms. We need to begin to write new songs. We need to begin to insist on what is right. And it's a new culture we need to enact. In fact, what we have done now is, I told you in the last 1 week I've been in Otta, we're launching Ready for Life. Ready for Life is a new curriculum that runs from primary to SS3. It's offered once a week, and it covers everything sexuality, everything identity, everything purpose, and what have you. So if we don't create a systemic change, we just realize that we wake up and we realize that
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we should be thinking about series that will change the narrative. We have just about 3 minutes to go. We must change the narrative. So I want both of you to respond to what you think the best strategy to ensure that we deal with her. Because I say, if we say we are with the girl child, it means I want to protect the girl child against violence, whether it's sexual, whatever, violence, because the girl child is very important. They are carrying the future. That's why I think they are important. But because we live in a patriarchy, people don't realize that, like the Besele I just talked about. So I want you guys to wind up 1 minute, just to wind up on what should we not forget as we've listened to this and as we look at the problem before us, and what should we do? 2 things. What shouldn't we forget, and what should we do? Dolapo, you go first.
Yeah, so we shouldn't forget that as bystanders, we also have it's upon us to speak out when we know something has happened to a child. It could be a boy, it could be a girl. When I say bystanders, these are people that like in the community or maybe extended family or friends or teachers that, these people can, confide in, or somebody who has been watching some inappropriate moves, by a perpetrator or a groomer, or you notice that somebody is coming too close for comfort. You owe it to that child to speak up on the child's behalf, because sometimes the children might not be able to speak out. And then one thing we should do moving forward is to focus on the family units. We can't overemphasize it. The family unit has to be focused on, and how do we do that? Through the religious institutions and the schools, yeah.
And Praise? Praise. I mean, yes, Praise is back. Yes. Just
Let's
how
not, let's not forget that we can't empower the girl child at the expense of the boy child. We have to empower both of them together. Because if we empower the girl child alone, we'll create another problem in the future where empowered women will be marrying disempowered men. Domestic violence will rise. It has to be our world. It can't be a female world or a male world. It's got to be our world. What we need to start is for all of us to sit down together and ask a simple question. Do we want to stop rape? If we want to stop rape, we will stop rape today, right?
Wow.
What I see is we do a lot of events. We pay lip service. State governors, first ladies, they do all kinds of things. When you give them intervention that will really work, that will trickle down to the community, they turn deaf ear as if they don't see it. Till next year, then they do another event. So I think we're event driven. And when you say you want to solve a problem and your behavior does not show that the behavior can solve the problem, then somebody is deceiving someone. So we need to answer the question, do we want to solve this problem? If we want to solve this problem, then let's go ahead to solve it, because I think it can be solved if we empower everyone and educate everyone and begin to raise families that work. Once we do that, I believe we'll kick out the predator. The predator's strength is the ignorance of the child. If we empower every child, then we'll kick out the predator. It's that easy.
Before you go, what is it that produces a predator?
Predators are made, like we said, that abuse is a cycle. Predators were also adults who were molested as children.
But you were molested. Did you become a predator?
Oh, yes. I mean, Auntie Adesua, if my life as a teenager was nothing to write home about, right? Until I had to go for help, because like she mentioned, I went bad at 12. At 12, I'd already become a sex addict myself. Sex was like an everyday thing for me.
And you would rape if you had to.
It was when I was 18 or 19 in the university that I began to, I spoke for the first time about my challenge and I began to look for help. So we need to understand that, like she rightly mentioned, there are two ways people respond. There are people who respond, who become very sexually active, and there are people who suffer from what we call sexual anorexia, which means opposite sex repel them, and some of them stretch it. In fact, at the root of many people we call LGBT today is sexual violence at a tender age. Some of them can't even remember when it happened, but there's a reconfiguration at the realm of your body when it has happened, that you stop seeing yourself as a being that must be respected. You start seeing yourself as a thing that must be used. And whether you can remember or you don't remember, it doesn't exempt you from the effect of what was done to you.
That will be conversation for another day. I'll bring you back here. This whole idea of even violence against young women and little boys and little girls can make them change their sexual orientation. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. And before I go, Dolapo, you have a son. How are you raising him to be different? We could learn from.
Yeah.
It's strange that you don't have a child, that you have a boy. So
yes. So for my son, even before he became, was it 8 or 9? He already knew about consent. I taught him about consent. I taught him about sex, and I taught him about rape. And
so what do you teach him about sex and consent?
Yeah, about consent is you do not even touch somebody without them asking you to, because people actually break boundaries by starting to touch some body parts before they get that bold enough to go to the very private parts. And then he knows the fact that even if he wants to hug a girl, it has to be she wanting to do so. And he knows the fact that any sexual knowledge you have about somebody is rape, no matter what it is. And he knows that even as a boy, somebody can molest him as a boy by touching his penis, because I call it what it is and he calls it what it is. It's not like you're calling it some very funny names that our parents call it. Yeah, PP or whatever. It is wrong for somebody to touch a penis. He knows that. He spoke about one time in school that a boy was getting too close for comfort. I'm like, it's good. You already, you've seen those signs. And although it went quite violent with him, because he was
shocked.
Yeah, he was shocked. But then, at least he was able to understand that. If I had not told him about all those things, imagine what would have happened. He would have been groomed from that very young age, and who knows what would have stemmed from that.
Yeah, our time is up. Dolapo and Praise, I want to thank you very much for giving me your time. It's been very educative. Clearly, maybe sometime during this series we'll do this again, because some other issues have been raised. But right now, what I'd like to tell people is they should find you online, work with you, and help us spread the message about being with her. And Praise says, government, put your money where your mouth is. Don't keep saying we want to stop this thing. I'm not empowering people who can do it. And Dolapo says we need to change the mindset of our boys and raise them differently. I appreciate you for sharing your time. And I say thank you very much. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next week. Thank you, Dolapo.